Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is a side event on implementing climate justice, solidarity with climate-vulnerable nations on the road to COP28, co-organized by a consortium of think tanks from around the world called ACT 2025. My name is Salimul Haq. I'm the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development, ICCAD for short. We are one of the members of the consortium, and it's our pleasure to be hosting this side event here in Bonn today. And I'd like to thank all of you who've taken the trouble to join us. We have a set of very distinguished speakers whom I'll introduce in a moment, but just to let you know that the ACT 2025 coalition of think tanks, as I said, we have produced, you will see on your seats, I hope everybody has a copy, what we call a call to action on a variety of different topics of the UNFCCC process. My center, ICCAD, leads the consortium on the topic of loss and damage, which we'll be addressing today. Other consortium members lead on other topics, and I'd encourage you to have a look at the full call for action. I won't make a description or a presentation on it myself, but I will urge you to have a look at it. I would like to now invite our first speaker, who is Ambassador Adao Suarez Barbosa from Timor-Leste, the climate envoy of Timor-Leste, also a long-time leader of the least developed countries negotiating team on loss and damage, and very much a leader in the issue of loss and damage. So I'd like to invite Adao Suarez to make an opening statement to start with.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salim. Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. Once again, thank you for the invitation and congratulations to the consortium. I think this is one of the critical entities that we are looking for to get support in terms of climate justice fund and climate justice action. So it is our pleasure to join this event on implementing climate justice issues. And we welcome your solidarity with our climate vulnerable nations on the roadmap to COP28. The people in my home country, like Timor-Leste, are increasingly confronted with the destructive consequences of more frequent and also severe landslides, floodings, and land droughts that endanger our lives, livelihoods, and our people becoming more vulnerable to the impact of climate change. When Cyclone Seroja hit Timor-Leste in 2021, it caused the most devastating floods we have experienced in a decade. It killed at least 42 people and displaced almost 14,000 people at the time. The collapsing of bridges, buildings, roads in the capital of Dili and other municipalities throughout the country put an additional burden on our already burdened government, because the cost of recovery reached hundreds of millions of dollars, even trillions of dollars we needed. We are suffering these impacts as a consequence of emissions that others have posed into the atmosphere. And as global emissions continue to increase, the cost of climate change inaction is not a cost that our people should bear. As you all know, that all 46 LDCs are contributing just about 2% of global emission. So this is a very small amount. And in fact, for Timor-Leste, we only contribute 0.003% compared to global emission. It's very, very small amount contribution, but we are suffering because of something else out there. This is why new funding and fund for addressing loss and damage is critically important for our countries, including my country, Timor-Leste, as part of climate justice action. COP27 delivered a very historic agreement to establish a loss and damage fund and funding arrangement itself. That decision was a significant step to concrete decades of injustice, climate change itself, that we haven't been experiencing and that we haven't been continuously working in this process. We have not established this fund and funding arrangement for the previous conference of parties, but that was very first time to have it. The new loss and damage fund and funding arrangement must be able to deliver on the needs and priorities of our countries with regard to slow onset events and also extreme weather events, both economic and non-economic losses and damage. And some agreements outside that we need to address only one single slow onset event, and we do say that no. So please support this issue at COP28. It will be useful, and together we will be more stronger. The LDC group has proposed a fund with 3 different windows. One window would be a rapid disbursement window, enabling the rapid release of funds in the immediate and urgent needs once we are affected by the impact of climate change, especially rapid extreme event. Another window would be release more substantial funding for reconstruction, rehabilitation, rebuilding, reconstruction, rehabilitation, but also addressing restoration issues. That's very, very key for us. We also propose another window for slow onset event. That will be very much taking a bit time after the disaster. And this slow onset fund or funding arrangement for addressing slow onset event has not taken place so far. So this is very huge gap that we need to fill. And we very much hear from different parties around the world that slow onset event will be considered as part of adaptation. But for us, this is loss and damage issues. Some people, they say that it could be integrated into DRR issues, but for us, this is not DRR fund and funding arrangement. This is real loss and damage caused by the impact of climate change, even though it's slow onset, but it is coming, and we are facing the moment. So to be with us, to say that Climate Justice Fund is to address this gap. As you all have heard, all of us, that fund must be standalone under the operating entity, a standalone operating entity under the financial mechanism of the convention. We are very much asking to have this because we learn from different operating entities that are taking place, like GF, GCF. That's very complicated issue to be accessed. So we need to have a standalone fund, new standalone fund that will be quickly delivering financial assistance for us once we face some economic and non-economic losses, and also, let's say, extreme event and also slow onset event. So we are asking for that, and we also request the Transitional Committee to come up with very strong and balanced recommendation to the COP28 to take further and appropriate decision. We do not need to have a minimizing averting issues. We need to go directly to the decision that we had at COP27, that is addressing ongoing and also expo loss and damage caused by the impact of climate change, not from somewhere else related to disaster risk reduction and also management, not part of adaptation. So with that wordings, once again, thank you very much for inviting us, and we look forward to get your support at COP28, but we need to start now. Please support us to have appropriate climate justice fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adao, for that very passionate plea for a climate justice fund in Dubai. Let's see if we can all work together to make that happen. It's now my pleasure to invite our second speaker, who was supposed to have been Sarah Ahmed, but I believe she's in the Glasgow Dialogue waiting to be called on to give a presentation there. So we have her colleague Nilesh Prakash, representing the vulnerable V20 group of finance ministers, to say a few words on her behalf. Nilesh?
Thank you very much, Salim. Yeah, so definitely we are in an important conversation also in the Glasgow Dialogue, which is also happening concurrently. So again, very important issues of adaptation finance. So I think the work that the V20 is championing is really outside of this space, but again, it's complementary and adding a lot of value. Mm-hmm. And you probably would have heard, along the corridors in this session, a lot about the global shield against climate risk. So this is complementing, what is happening here under the UNFCCC loss and damage, funding mechanism. So happy to share more in this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nilesh. Now let me move to our speaker, who is from the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition, Mamadou Silla. Mamadou, what is the situation with the youth and young people on this particular issue? You want to give us an update?
Yeah, sure, Professor. Thank you very much. And I greet the audience and everyone present here and other panelists. My name is Mamadou Silla. I am from Senegal, which is in West Africa, and I'm also Advocacy Working Group Coordinator of the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition. And within the coalition, we obviously work on issues. We are a coalition of young people that are working to drive change to intend to address loss and damage issue, both within the negotiations, but also outside the negotiations. We have some of our colleagues who are already inside the negotiation room participating in the Glasgow Dialogue. Yes, and in the last months, we've started some consultations at LDYC to have to gather the youth voices around loss and damage, what they are expecting at the SPs, at the from here until COP28, but also at the Global Finance Summit, which is happening in Paris soon. And just to let you know that we have gathered a document of around 20 pages, which sums up what are our expectations on the global take on loss and damage, on finance and loss and damage funding arrangements. So this document was endorsed by 8,000 young people. That's a huge number. We say that we are trying to create really a very unified voice of young people, both within and outside the negotiations to address this issue. I'm very happy to delve into the details and what are expectations in the very few minutes, of course. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much, Mamadou, for that. Let me now turn to one of our other speakers, Ines Bakhtui from the Stockholm Environment Institute. Ines, you've been doing a lot of research on particularly financing for loss and damage. What would you like to share with us now? And in particular, what do you think we need to focus on to get a result in Dubai?
Thanks, Salim. I have been working indeed with a coalition of research organizations on thinking about what structures and modalities for funding could constitute the future Loss and Damage Fund with the Stockholm Environment Institute and with ECAD and German Watch and other organizations. And over the last 2 years, we've been focusing on hearing the voices of the people, the communities that are particularly affected and what their views are, because we felt that these views were not represented as enough in the ongoing processes with the transitional committee, for instance, and then confronting or looking parallelly with these views, what options exist within existing funds, how they work, how they accomplish certain functions, and how that could be replicated or transformed for a loss and damage fund. And yeah, so that's been a year of consultations with community representatives, with local NGOs, local funders, national governments and local governments, and interviews with funders and negotiators. And I guess what came back to us is that the needs of affected communities in most vulnerable places of the world, their requests very much derive from what they identify as their needs and priorities. What they have told us is that they really lack support for livelihood protection, for non-economic aspects of loss and damage. They've mentioned again and again mental health support and ecosystem restoration, and for long-term recovery from climate impacts. But they've also stressed how difficult it is for them to access funding because the current arrangements that exist in general pass through national governments, and while investments made by governments to ensure that there is a cohesion at the national level for structures, that there are initiatives that reach everybody and that there's a transformative approach, while these are essential, a lot of them, and especially indigenous communities or marginalized communities, are left aside and cannot be reached, and there are very few opportunities for them to access funding for many reasons that I would love to develop. But I feel like that could take a whole hour. So what came up as options that they would like to see for the Loss and Damage Fund, for other arrangements, and for loss and damage finance in general, if some of you are involved in that field and are planning to launch initiatives or transform the work you're doing to address loss and damage. They have called for decision-making structures that includes them, both in how, and that's specifically for the UNFCCC, both in how the fund is governed, so having a seat at the board or devolved systems, and decision over how the funding is used, again through devolution, so giving them the funding and letting them decide how it will be used. They've called for small funding, grants going straight to them. They have asked for, what else can I tell you? Yeah, they've asked for support for capacity building because managing those grants, they realize, requires a certain number of skills and human resources that they don't always have access to. And most of all, they've asked for complementarity in those approaches and for finally feeling like they are included in those processes. I'd love to go further, but I don't want to take all the time, so I'll stop here.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Inez, for those excellent and very valid and I think extremely important considerations as we design the new fund. Now I'd like to turn to Matthias Soderberg from Denmark. Matthias, in the COP27 decision, it was a big effort, joint effort, I would say, of North-South civil society to get the result on loss and damage in particular. But we are also still facing a deficit in terms of financing for adaptation. So one of the questions we always get when we push for loss and damage finance is they'll just take it away from adaptation and call it loss and damage. So how do we prevent that from happening? Give us some thoughts.
Thank you, Salim. That's a really, really good question. And just to add to your question, I am afraid it's not just only adaptation funds which will be relabeled, it's also humanitarian funding and ODA in general. And this is a a real a reality. We already see it today because climate finance, to a very, very large extent, is not new and additional. It's funds which were allocated for ODA by developed countries. And if this is not considered when we make a new fund for to address loss and damage, it will clearly happen again. So there are several things which needs to happen. One is, of course, that we need to ensure that the funds are new and additional. We need this to be stressed in agreements, and we need this to be commitments on national level. We have the challenge that climate finance from developed countries, it's going through national processes, national budgets, parliaments, which means that it's not enough to make a UN decision. We really need these decisions to trickle down and to be interpreted on national level in national laws, so that there are enough adequate funds allocated. And we should remember that a majority of developed countries still not deliver on the commitments on ODA to deliver 0.7% of their GNI as ODA. So there's a long way to go on that track. That's why we also need innovative finance. I think one of the really positive results from COP27 is that it also mentions innovative finance. And of course, innovative finance, that could be many different things. And it's also a little bit scary because it also means that there can be things which are not, solutions which are not good or just. But there are opportunities, and I just shortly mention one, that's the International Climate Solidarity Levies Initiative, which is a proposal to add levies to different sectors or initiatives. It could be a levy on flights, for example. It could be a levy on credit cards. It could be a levy on hotels, cars, a lot of different things. But a way to show solidarity from those who are consuming, those who are actually part of the problem, because they are also contributing with pollutions and emissions. So this levy initiative, I think it's a good option, and hopefully it could also contribute with funds, grants to the upcoming fund.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to all our panelists for that excellent initiation. I'm going to do one more round of questions for each of the panelists, and then I'll open the floor to anybody who wants to either comment or ask questions. My second round, I'll go in the same order that we did it in the first round, is to ask each of you to focus. We've got less than 6 months left to COP28. So this is a very tight schedule in which we need to deliver something. Right? So I'd like you to focus your thoughts on what do you think is deliverable in COP28, and what can we do now to make it happen? Adao, you start.
Thank you very much, Professor Salim. Yes, what we need to do, firstly, for the work of Transitional Committee needs to be speed up. I think that's urgent need, because the Transitional Committee has been mandated by the COP.
You're a member of the committee, so
I'm also part of them.
You are promising to do that now.
Yes, of course.
You're not recommending to them. You are going to do it.
So what we will do, we are going to ask you to provide further, let's say, pressure on us, on me, also my colleagues. We could come up with very strong recommendation. And in fact, for Transitional Committee members, we have already put things together at TC2 meeting. And hopefully by TC3, we will come up with some textual issues. And TC4 will be reporting to the COP. So reporting will be capturing issues of recommendation. So this is our job, including my job at the TC itself. But for you, you need to start now. Push on us, not only on the committee, but also funding providers. And think about how we could quickly operationalize in terms of what modalities will be used. Think about this and provide us your thoughts. Because we are not alone. We are, we need to get support from you all. So I think this is from TC side and also from your side. Your side will be very much working on technical issues and pushing us to move quickly forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Adao. Mamadou, what are the youth going to be doing between now and COP?
Yes, I think that's an interesting question that also we've been asking to ourselves what we should do from now to COP28. But I would like just to add something first, like on the demands that obviously that echoes what the colleagues has already said, that obviously what we young people want is obviously the operationalization of the fund at COP28, but then the fund responds actually to the needs of the people that say that the fund is new, accessible, grant-based, and it does not add to the debt burden that the vulnerable countries are already experiencing. But also to guarantee inclusivity and participation throughout the process. Actually, young people, women, indigenous voices, marginalized groups need to be added throughout the process, from the beginning to the end, and not just like for the beauty of the room or for anything else, but as equal stakeholders, which is also very important to us. To us. And another thing is obviously is regarding the time. The fund needs to be operationalized fast, because every bit of seconds that we are losing in the negotiations, extending discussions and so on and so forth, there are some people that are losing their homes, losing their cultural heritages, dying even because of loss and damage, and then we are guilty of that. So regarding the work of the transitional committee, I think I first express myself as from my own personal point of view. It's just to say that I'm extremely actually worried on what will this near future regarding loss and damage what we have, because until now, at the moment of the work, we can't really answer that question of scenario case that will happen at COP28. And we are halfway of the work of the transitional committee, and the Glasgow dialogue is ending today, and we have many questions that people have not been able to answer so far. And obviously we'll have recommendations, but then there are, I think, some things that really needs to be considered by then. And then I want to say this, that we have seen very recently as young people, we have remarked that there is a shift in language regarding the loss and damage, that people talk more about the loss and damage funding arrangement. For us, it's a package. It's a loss and damage fund and loss and damage funding arrangements. So just bear with that, and we are trying as young people to kind of reestablish that so that it's sure, so that negotiators know that we are watching them, we have an eye on them, and then we are following them actually on everything that is happening. And also one last point, maybe it's regarding the transparency. I think the transitional committee has not discussed that. Probably they have 2 more meetings coming, but for us it's really important that we set clear, transparent reporting mechanisms on the fund. I'm not going to rush on that anyway. I know that this is some point that the committee will be delivering on in the next point, but it's just to bear in mind that transparency is really important and through the process. So the second Glasgow dialogue is ending in very few minutes, and then we as young people, we are taking stock of it. And obviously, as activists, we'll be here to remind that decision makers that we are watching them, obviously, and that they have a historical and moral responsibility to deliver the fund as soon as possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, excellent. So they will be watching you, all right? all the way to COP. Now let me ask Nilesh to elaborate a little bit more on the V20 initiative that is already, we hope, in the works to address loss and damage.
Thanks very much, Salim. So I thought, I'd also briefly answer that question, on road to COP28. So there are a number of things. I mean, in my opening sort of statement, I mentioned we are outside of this space, but it's not an irrelevant space. There's a lot of complementarity there. So I guess, the voice of the CVF and V20 is absolutely very important. We need to weigh in on all these issues and the discussions that is happening in this space. But other than that, I think, for the V20 in particular, we need to be able to, considering that there is a lot of, financial commitment under the Global Shield against, climate risks, we need to achieve, quick runs. We need to be able to demonstrate that the climate risk, which, climate vulnerable countries are facing unfairly, that we are able to address that through the market mechanisms, for example. So we need to be able to demonstrate, with the deployment of the raft of solutions that we are suggesting under the Global Shield, we need to be able to do that in at least, some of the Pathfinder countries. We've got about 8 countries, and the Pacific region is a Pathfinder region there as well. So we need to achieve some, runs there. Other than that, under the Global Shield, there are 3 financing vehicles, and one of the financing vehicles is a CVF and the V20 Joint Multi-Donor Fund, and that has got the V20's loss and damage funding program. And I think, Salim, you're very much aware in the last 2 days, that has been, boosted by additional funding from the government of Wallonia. So we are now sitting at 3.5 million euros under that. So again, it's a small size funding, but I think, we can achieve some big things, by, through demonstration loss and damage projects. So, and the good part is that, just early next week, we are concluding the financing agreements. So again, with the loss and damage funding program, we need to be able to disburse some funding. We need to be able to be seen with the communities that we are actually implementing and funding these loss and damage projects. So hopefully we will get some very initial results by the time we are in Dubai. So we hope to discuss that further.
Great, good news, good to hear. Inez, again, you're looking at a very vast array of all the issues. And we are already in the last 3 days of the Glasgow Dialogue, the second sessions. We have a understanding of the complexity of the issues, and they are complex. And we're emerging in terms of what needs to be done. But I'd like you to reflect a little bit about some early wins. What is it that we can fix quickly and address quickly and demonstrate quickly?
I'm glad that you formulated the question like that because as my colleague from the V20 said, I think that an early win when it comes to the funds and the arrangements and their implementation is piloting. There is an urgency, as everyone repeats, the fund needs to be implemented urgently and disbursement needs to start fast. But there's also this desire to have something that is complete, that is sound, that is effective, and that is fair. And there's always the question of, well, implementing a new fund takes years and operationalizing it is going to be endless, and that doesn't correspond to the needs related to loss and damage finance. So I'm no legal expert here, and I don't know what it entails in terms of what is feasible within the UNFCCC, but piloting, starting small and then scaling up, learning from mistakes seems like a great way to go. That's also true, for example, with solving some of the issues that exist in existing UNFCCC funds. Like there are big issues with accreditation and accessibility. There could be ideas, there could be piloting projects that if an organization or a country proves that they're able to manage a smaller amount of money, they can skip accreditation systems and get access to bigger funds in the future. That could be something that could be considered. But in the next 6 months, well, I really invite the TC committee to read the research that we're producing. And in general, there are so many researchers, practitioners who produce so much content. I really invite the TC to stay informed on what these people are the ones doing the innovative thinking. They really are. And I am also, I see a gap in the conversation. I feel like observers, civil society is missing an understanding of what the legal or liability consequences of placing a loss and damage fund here and there, like whether it would be within the UNFCCC funding structure or in the World Bank. I'm sure that there are like legal and liability consequences that are very much anticipated by negotiators, and I don't hear discussions around that within civil society, and I feel like it's missing. So it's kind of a call, like if there are legal experts, lawyers who would like to inform us, who are very bad at understanding what like legal implications are. I would love to read about that and talk about that with someone who's knowledgeable. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Great, thank you very much. So any lawyers in the room, you have a chance to answer in a minute. So Matthias, let me reframe the question a little bit for you. Denmark was a first mover between Glasgow and Sharm el-Sheikh to say we will fund loss and damage, all right? Can Denmark be a first mover in actually delivering something in COP28 in Dubai?
Well, it depends a little bit if you mean Denmark, the government, or Denmark, civil society. When it comes to the government, I can't speak on their behalf, but I know that they do have, the minister has a big commitment for making progress on loss and damage. So I hope that would also sort of become something real and concrete. We will see. But I can mention just a little bit about what we are doing as well. We are a development NGO, a faith-based development NGO, and we have been working with long-term development and humanitarian aid for many years. And we have since 2019 tried to monitor the projects which have a link to loss and damage, because we also believe that we need to learn, we need to get experiences, and this can help us to develop a fund and develop new initiatives. And there are quite a lot of important experiences we already pick up. For example, the challenge with attribution, that many of the climate-related or climate-associated effects we see, it's not always easy to document scientifically that this house was flooded by a climate-associated flood or just a flood. And I'm a little bit worried. I'm always thinking about the people on the ground, and I'm a little bit worried if we create a fund where the money will be limited to and delayed because of some scientific rules that this storm was climate-related or not. So some flexibility is one of the experiences we have picked up. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but it's really important that there happen things from now to the COP, and we will push all the TC members, even though it's easier, I guess, for some of them because they are quite aligned.
Thank you very much. Just on that note of whether or not we are in a position, or the scientific community is in a position to attribute the delta of impacts due to human-induced climate change for 1.1 degree centigrade rise, we're not there yet. Right? In fact, yesterday in this very room, there was a CGIAR panel of scientists who work on attribution. And we had one of the leading scientists working on attribution. And she said that they're getting much better at it, but they're not in a position to give you the exact amount of this was because of climate change and this was not climate change. But what they can say is the element of climate change is more than zero. And that's good enough. As long as there is an element of human-induced climate change in the causation of the impact, it qualifies as a human-induced climate change impact, all right? That, I think, is the take-home message of this going forward. Okay, I'm going to now open the floor to anybody who'd like to make comments or ask a question of any of the panelists. Feel free. Yes, we have somebody there. We have a roving mic. If you can identify yourself.
Hi, Tim Stickings. I'm a journalist with the National Abu Dhabi. I'd like to ask, could I ask the ambassador from Timor-Leste to give some examples of how the slow onset impacts are already taking effect? And then generally, can I ask the panel, what do you expect from the COP presidency as a broker in these talks on the loss and damage fund? Thank you.
Shall we take a couple more questions, and then we'll come to the panel to answer or comment? And I see we have Sarah in the room now. So Sarah, if you'd like to come up, I'll give you the floor in a minute as well. We have a question over there? Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Hello, I'm from the Manila Observatory, as well as care about climate. And my question is, this will be a very important COP coming up in a few months, and even as early as now, the themes do seem to be, of course, the global stocktake and loss and damage. As a young person working in the climate sector in the Global South, I do see solidarity even on institutional levels. So I was wondering, for all the panelists actually, but perhaps even Matthias can answer as well, what does solidarity look like on an institutional level in the Global North, as well as perhaps even on the ground with regards to for example, implementing climate justice, for example, loss and damage and the GST. Thank you very much.
Great question. Thank you very much. Let's take another one, and then I'll come to the panel to respond. Anybody else want to? Yes, here, Mizan. No, use the microphone.
Okay. Yeah. I have a general question
about climate. You have to introduce yourself.
Yeah. I'm Mizan Khan, Deputy Director of ICAD. ICAD, you know, I don't need to give its full name. And I'm also the technical lead of the LDC University's Consortium on Climate Change, which is an official program of the LDC governments for capacity building. I have a general question about climate justice, injustice. If I can mention few indicators. For example, ODA is a static globally now, but for the LDCs, it has gone down last year. Okay, this is one indicator of injustice. Then about correlation between climate finance flow and vulnerability index. There is no correlation. Okay. Then even for the LDCs, about 70% is loan. Only minor share is grant. And then even for the LDCs, more money goes for mitigation than in adaptation. Here, LDCs have a highest priority for adaptation. So these are the injustices. Now, how at the COP28, what could be the levers that could inject some sense of justice in the climate negotiations? Because diplomacy is totally divorced of justice considerations. This is my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great provocative question. I'll invite Sarah to maybe lead off with some thoughts. You missed the earlier part, but please feel free to share some thoughts.
Yep. Thank you. I think Dr. Mizan's point on all of these injustices is a reflection as well of the governance or arrangements or the board of these large institutions. We're lacking in voice and seats, frankly. And so the V20, this finance ministers group, has put forward the Accra Marrakesh agenda on a fit-for-climate financial architecture with their perspectives on what would be a successful reform agenda that would bring the needs of the vulnerable countries and people at the forefront. And you rightly highlighted ODAs going down for LDCs. You also mentioned a lack of adaptation funding. Actually, there's a lack of everything funding at the moment: adaptation, And the low carbon transition as well, a lot of the burden is actually on developing countries. I can't tell you how many billions countries spent on subsidies because of pricing that is out of their control. And the other point on loss and damage, I just come from the Glasgow dialogue, and it's clear that there's a lot of access issues, and I think the issue, I mean, it's great that there's progress in the loss and damage discussions, but I think what we really need to focus on is the delivery to ensure that it delivers fast and efficiently. And so we're glad to be working with many of those on this panel, especially Dr. Salim, on the loss and damage funding program of the V20. And we hope to share that as well as they come through the learnings for the loss and damage fund.
Thank you very much. Adao, I'll go to you next because there was a question for you, and then Matthias, and then I'll open the floor to the other panelists.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, with regard to slow onset events, example, I think in Timor-Leste, sea level rise is one of them. You know, we had a brief research. We did it in 2015. Some of wells belongs to the community, coastal area communities. At the moment, those are no more existing. It's under seawater. And one of the houses of the community in still in close to the Dili capital city, half of the house is under seawater, half the house belongs to the owner of the house. This is a real loss and damage issue with regard to slow onset events. And in Bangladesh, they have seawater infiltration, salinity issues. So that's also very much affecting the farmers, the owner of the rice field. So this is very much affecting our economic and even non-economic loss and damage. In terms of climate justice issues, yes, like we are now mixing ODA and climate finance. That's why we request Standing Committee on Finance to come up with very clear climate finance definition. But where is it? Now it's more complex issue with regard to climate finance. But for us, climate justice could be new and additional to the existing ODA. It's not part of ODA. Mm-hmm. And when we ask about new and additional to the loss and damage fund and funding arrangement, it means new and additional to the ODA, new and additional to the adaptation, and also mitigation funds. New, it should be new. And if you say something out of the box of UNFCCC, it should be new and additional to the existing humanitarian assistance. Mm-hmm. It should be new and additional to the, let's say, funding that is being addressed, most vulnerable countries provided by multilateral development banks. Mm-hmm. So it should be new and additional to address real loss and damage. I think that's the key point. And in terms of question, it was not clear for me, global stocktake linking to loss and damage. That will be a crucial decision to address all those two issues. But I didn't get more clear question about this. So Global North, I think they need to provide. They need to perfect the building. We need to deliver that. So Global North, they need to take leadership of this. And in terms of mitigation of greenhouse gas, they need to take the lead. Article 9.3 is asking them to provide financial support apart from their obligation to reduce their emission. Financial support to whom? To the most vulnerable countries one. For all developing countries, but we are now discussing about who is the most vulnerable countries. Who are the most vulnerable countries one. So this is my points, but once again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adao. Matthias, you can answer any or all of the questions, but the particular one is the concept of solidarity. How do we build on that?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, there was a question about the expectations of the COP presidency, and I think that also links to this. If we really, my expectations, if we're going to have a solidarity approach as well, is to ensure that there's enough space to actually deliver results on loss and damage, but also on adaptation and finance. There's one of the challenges in these talks is that they are not always facilitated in a way so that they can deliver results. It becomes a process and a process and a process and a process. So we really need a presidency moving forward. When it comes to solidarity, and especially in the global north, I think it's really important to stress that it's dual. The global north, if we living in the global north, if we're going to be show solidarity and take responsibility and compensate for what we have done, we need to reduce our own emissions. We need to make sure that we are not continuing to misuse the planet and the ecosystems. So that's one part of it. And the other part is what we've been talking about here, to deliver on the commitments related to climate finance, new and additional finance, but also when it comes to delivering support to adaptation. And now also from COP27, ensure that we have additional funds for loss and damage. So these are part of the solidarity concept. We cannot be have a solidarity just based on nice words and speeches. There must be action. And then just the last point, it's linking to this. How do we make sure that the COP becomes have a solidarity as a core? One thing is, of course, that developed countries bring something there in terms of decisions made back home, showing that they now will deliver the finance, the mitigation action, and everything else, but also the commitment to negotiate global agreement which are just. And these two aspects are also important to remember, because it's one thing to negotiate things, but you also need to act back home and have the legal setup to deliver on the commitments.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matthias. So let me now invite our two other panelists if they'd like to respond to any of the questions. Mamadou, you go first, and then Ines.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with this question of what are our expectations to the COP28 presidency, and I think I'll be very brief on that. I think what we've understood that, for instance, at the moment, at this point, that the COP28 presidency is adopting, let's say, a neutral sense for the moment. Going onto consultations and that. And I think what we're expecting is actually they have a very active stance, obviously, because there's a lot of things to be discussed. There's a lot of things that we need to be solved. And then we really cannot delay the decisions beyond COP28, actually. So that means that, the COP28 presidency is really to be very active and then facilitate the process as much as possible. And that solidarity in the global north look like? I think I'm not the best person to respond to that question, but I still wanted to share a little message on that. It's like, I think the global north has a lot of things to learn from the global south, actually. And when we are talking about solidarity and cooperation, we are always adopting this one way. It's just like it comes from the global north and then goes to the global south, while there's a lot of things that the global north countries have to learn from the global south countries, especially on indigenous knowledge, capacity building, technology transfer, all these things we also can think of how the global south countries actually brings and then give to the global north. Just one example is like we have less emissions, you can come and then we show you how we do all that. And maybe on the last question, I think one as young as youth movements, what we struggle regarding justice and equality at the negotiations is obviously access to patches. And what we are trying to do is like we are facilitating at our coalition so that young people can actually go to their governments and then they give them, the government, they have the obligations actually to give the young people and involve them in the negotiations as much as possible. You know, we are encouraging actually at the coalition more members to go to the party delegates, discuss with them, have the party batches, and then they really get involved because so that they can also equally voice as young people, they can equally voice the ideas, not just like having party patches like that, but also participating in the discussions, in the processes, and also bringing, let's say, a youth voice in the negotiations. And I'll just end on this. On this is that last year the coalition on the way to COP27, we have had this initiative with the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, of to kind of like experiment how a loss and damage fund should look like actually. And what we did is like we granted many grassroots communities in the global south actually. We granted 10 projects of $10,000 and one big project of $50,000, which is very big. So if we can do that as young people, if we can collaborate, you know, discuss on the modalities, who's going to access it, and then be able to deliver the money to the young people, and then the young people start implementing and then follow the process and evaluate all these projects. I think also the parties, the delegations, the decision maker, they're able to do that. They just need some push and some political will to go ahead on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ines.
Yes, I thought I wanted to rebound on the commitment done on injustice by Mizan. I want to report something that a woman told me about this adaptation project that happened in her community, where they got funding to help them better access, well, the idea was to better access markets to sell their agricultural products as a way to improve their revenues and reduce their vulnerability. But the first thing that they wanted to do with that funding was getting a car or a truck, I don't remember what it was, to get access to that market faster and in a more reliable way. And they were not able to use that funding because apparently getting a car is against climate objectives because it pollutes. And so there's this complete gibberish, like nonsense of creating boxes and typologies of what you can do with money or not. And justice is about those responsible for climate change, funding activities of those impacted. So those labels, adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, etc., they make sense here at the political level because we need to hold those people accountable, right? And they need to give sufficient funding for each one of those boxes. But on the ground, addressing climate change is about, it's conceived as like reducing vulnerability, but vulnerability is multifactorial, and it's about accessibility, it's about reducing income inequalities and increasing your income and increasing education. So adaptation is not just this box of activities that the Adaptation Fund is allowed to fund or not. And I really hope that people who get funding in LDCs in most affected countries will be able to use it as they think is best because they know what they need, and often, most of the time, it will not fit the narrow-minded understanding of funders from the global north who've never had to face a cyclone or who've never had to face a threat of hunger. So that's what I wanted to add on the issue of injustice.
Great, thank you very much. Before we close, excuse me, Let me just invite anybody who wants to add a last comment or question before I'll ask the panelists to give 1 minute concluding remarks. I don't see any urgent hands, so let me turn to the panelists. This time I'm going to go down the line, starting with Sarah. And my question to each of you is something that you think you're working on right now that would be possible for us to work on together going forward, okay? So all of us, we all work in our different ways. How do we add value to each other? And what is it that something you are doing that you feel would get added value by involving some of us, if not all of us? So Sarah, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. Well, there are many things we're doing that you can definitely contribute to, but just thinking about the Accra-Marrakesh agenda, there's this point that right now adaptation and loss and damage are counted together pretty much. Like there's no DAC marker for loss and damage. And I think if we could, in the Accra-Marrakesh agenda, it specifically says we should have an OECD DAC marker for loss and damage so we can track it and also get our definitions straight. But the definitions on the global side should not be the definitions that we stick to necessarily on the implementation side. There are ways to design programs and manage this at the portfolio level instead of trying to micromanage this, which I hear from Inez based on her example. So yeah, if we could work on this OECD DAC marker, we can track it at the global level. Thank you.
Great idea.
Yeah, very basic answer. I'm sorry, I don't have anything better coming to my mind. But I want to have more spaces for dialogue and genuine dialogue where people are free to express ideas and brainstorm and not be afraid of sounding relevant to negotiators, or really that's how we have good ideas coming up, and that's how we have creative and fast and adequate solutions coming up. So I hope that people come together and have more conversations from all grounds.
Great. Thank you very much. More talk. Good. Adao.
Firstly, climate justice fund for LDCs will be grant-based from public fund. So we need to work together how to concretize this. We need to have an exact figure, not really exact figure, but we need to have some sort of figure. How much do we need collectively by when? So universities and researchers, they need to support us. And Salim and also Mirzan, Dr. Mirzan, Dr. Salim, you can just help us. You can coordinate on that way. We also need to have more discussions with technical issues on the mosaic issues that our colleagues are talking about, and the fund itself. Please provide us your thoughts how to design the fund and funding arrangement. But for LDCs, the fund should be central issue. Funding arrangement will be just a second issue, and it will be complementarity for the fund. It should be coordinated under the Conference of Parties. So please provide your thoughts around this and support around this, and we can discuss more, not only ending this today, but we can discuss more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Adao, if you fix the fund, I'll suggest something, fixing the money, right? So just following up on my previous comment about the international climate solidarity levies, this is something we actually can do, all of us. We could go home and talk with the local store and ask if they maybe could add a levy in solidarity with those affected by the climate change. Because when we consume things, we also contribute to climate change. So it's fair to have a solidarity levy on consumption. Could be start in the small with just a local store, and then send the money to the fund, which Adao will fix. Thanks.
Yes, I wanted to start with thanking Act 2025 and partners for allowing us to participate in the discussions, and just to strengthen what Ines said, that is like we always need these platforms where we can voice our ideas, where we can share our message with people, and where we hope that we are actually listened. And maybe one point is at LDYC in the last 2 months, we have created a research working group additionally to the 4 working groups we had. We have advocacy, storytelling, training, and communications. Now we have a research working group in collaboration with IIED, because also we have this remark that, maybe young people are not enough contributing to knowledge making. So this is one thing that we wanted to address. And we are currently, some of our researchers, they're working on non-economic loss and damage. The choice of this topic is also from our past experiences, is sometimes non-economic loss and damage is really really put out of the discussions, or actually not enough discussed. And would really love to have an expert eye on that. Maybe we can prepare questions and discussions and surveys that we can follow up with experts on the issue, because also we are young people and we might be missing some stuff. Yes, I think this is something that we can work on.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So let's give all our panelists a hand for some excellent comments. So before we conclude, let me just share a couple of thoughts from my side, going out of the narrow discussions we've had focusing on justice in the context of funding for loss and damage. The issue of loss and damage, in my view, is really a very, very big one. All right? And it's not just an incremental change, something happened, we have done something, we have to do something new. It is a fundamental change in terms of the impacts of climate change. We have an El Nino coming. Right now, it's already started. It's going to cause havoc, and nobody's ready and nobody's prepared, and everybody's going to be caught totally unawares. New York right now has a haze from the wildfire from Canada. And so we need to rethink how we deal with this issue, in my view, that makes loss and damage from climate change the number one climate change issue. And mitigation, what we used to call mitigation, is just simply averting loss and damage. What we used to call adaptation is minimizing loss and damage, because adaptation never brings it to zero. There's always residual impacts. And addressing loss and damage is the reality of today. We're going to have to deal with it today. And it'll happen every single day, not just at the COPs. And so COP28, in my view, in a very real sense, and this is my message from Mamadou and his colleagues in the youth collaboration, you should treat it as COP1 of the new era of losses and damages from climate change being a reality. Up to now, we did not deal with it as a reality. From now, we have to deal with it as a reality. And so as we do that, you, the younger generation, are going to have to take the lead in making this COP1 and then next year COP2. Not 29, not 28, because 28 years were wasted. We need to get new energy into doing new things and reframing everything in terms of averting and minimizing and addressing loss and damage is my way of issuing that new language to deal with this new reality that I feel that very strongly about. The fund is one small element of it. It's an important element, but it is not by any means the most important element. The most important element is just understanding we are entering a new world for which none of us are well prepared. So let me thank you all very much for coming here, being with us. I hope you'll continue to interact and engage with us going forward, and to see many of you again in Dubai in COP28, where hopefully we'll get a major result on the funding for loss and damage, the fund for loss and damage. Thank you all very much, and thanks to our